Great. So, George, thanks so much for having me. My background is all in marketing. I've been lucky to work in a variety of industries. I started in B2C and then moved into B2B in the early stage of when SMBs were trying to scale up to enterprise. And then I moved back into a variety of B2C roles in telehealth and food tech and digital e-commerce. So I really got to take my learnings from B2B to B2C. And now recently I moved back to B2B. So I've taken, the advanced version of what I learned to B2B with the B2C tactics and now taking it back to B2B. I am starting somewhere new and going to be announcing in the next few weeks, which I'm very excited about. And my position is, VP marketing, CMO, depending on the company. Strategic focus it's always about understanding the company's long-term vision and how do I set the milestones to get there, that with each milestone we're also improving margins, profitability, while we're on our way to achieving strategic goals.
All right, awesome. I had a question. I know this was a bit off not listed in the interviews questions, but I did want to, if you're open to it, to dig in a little bit about some of the distinctions that you've seen between B2B and B2C, and what are like the ways that maybe you can take some of the B2C insights and learnings and apply them to B2B. Anything that comes to mind there?
Yeah, it's very interesting, and it's also changed a lot over the last 20 years. So B2B, I think, what really distinguished it for me, especially earlier on, was the idea of a long nurturing cycle, nurturing funnel, sales cycle, as opposed to impulse buys. The idea of, warming up leads, qualifying and waiting sales leads, and getting them to a stage where you actually understood where they were in the buyer's journey. Whereas B2C, I always found was much better at understanding the emotional engagement with people. How do we market and create messaging that speaks to people and, what they're trying to achieve in terms of their daily lives, their emotional, functional benefits. And what I think is that when the two mix together, you can have a really robust system that is scalable, which is traditionally something I think B2B taught B2C first. But imbues the emotions of B2C marketing, and then you just, you're unstoppable.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. That reminds me of a conversation that I had with an old friend who is actually the founding marketing leader at Gong, who's actually Israeli. And Udi, and he talked a lot about that personalization, like that human to human connection, and how they focused on developing the Gong brand to be company to human, right? As much as possible to simulate that human to human connection. So that really resonates with me. All right, awesome. Well, when developing a sales enablement strategy, from a product marketing or marketing perspective or point of view, what are some of those first steps, right? Because I think that we have hired a bunch of like maybe operational oriented people. This is at least what I've seen, right? A lot of operational oriented people who are like good at like configuring the CRM and these sort of things, right? Maybe more like sales minded in some ways, to go and then do sales enablement. So I think that the marketing perspective or lens on this topic is quite unique. So what would you suggest those early steps be? And what is the perspective of that marketing mind?
Great question. For me, I think the formula is very simple. Doing it well, not always so easy, but it starts with segmentation. Everything really starts with segmentation. You have to understand the market segments that you're trying to appeal to. If you're in a company that already has a product, that's one thing. If you're establishing, early on and you're trying to establish product market fit, that's something different. But you really have to start from understanding the market segments. Once you understand the segments, then within that, you can develop some personas. Having really good buyer personas then allows you to move towards understanding their pain points. I'm a huge fan of the jobs to be done framework. I think it really helps simplify and humanize, what we're trying to sell or offer people in terms of value. So you now have hopefully a good understanding of who your market is, and the segments they find themselves, who the actual people you're speaking to, and what are the jobs they're trying to achieve. That's when things get really fun, because you can look at how do I help them achieve that. And one of the things that I found super useful is the value proposition canvas, the idea of pains and gains. So everyone has pains that they're experiencing when they're trying to finish their jobs. Everyone has gains they'd like to get. So how your solution helps them solve the pains, what are the gains you're promising to them in using it, is going to match exactly the value you offer to exactly the pain they're trying to solve. Now, the reason I start from all of this, even for an existing company, is because that is going to tell you what you need to be explaining to them or providing them, in the buyer journey through the sales enablement process. And then you can have it in different mediums, different types of materials, things like that. But I really believe that in order to do a good job of marketing, in order to do a good job of sales, you have to understand the pain that you're offering to solve. And until you do that, everything else is really just kind of shooting in the dark.
Now, do you have maybe one or so tactical tips that you could give around, from the product marketing perspective, right? Or that marketing perspective, uncovering the pains and gains you referred to? And the reason why I ask is, I've been on the sales side, I've been on the marketing side. Most of my career has been on the sales side. And sales has this perspective of what they believe the pains and gains are, right? And then marketing is doing all this, I think, higher, more strategic at times level in research or collecting these insights. And then there seems to be sometimes this conflict, right? And you see this a lot with like decks or messaging and stuff.
Right.
And it's like, so how would you recommend that sales provide this insight to marketing in a way that is actually like strategic and useful, right? And then, but really honing in more on the perspective of the marketer out there, or product marketer, right?
Yeah, great question. So the relationship between marketing and sales is always, it's always an interesting one. Let's put it that way, because the two need each other so much, but they don't often agree on the way they need each other. And I have huge respect for salespeople. It's an incredibly difficult job, and I'm glad I'm on the marketing side of it. But I think, there's a secret weapon when it comes to this, and it's always going to be customer research. It's going to be speaking to customers. There is nothing that will inform marketing strategy better than actually hearing your customers talk. And just for me, that's where I go to every time. If you've got existing customers, then amazing, especially where you can track that against, one opportunities versus not, and having a better understanding of, what's keeping them as retained customers. If not, you focus groups, other things, but conducting interviews that let people speak and tell you the answers to questions you didn't even know to ask. That's for me the secret weapon.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Now, I wanted to dive into the buyer journey. You talked a little bit about the buyer journey and its importance, right? In understanding not only the pains and gains, but how this relates to the particular steps or stages of that buyer journey. How does the marketer determine the buyer journey? Who should they work with? And also like the buckets, right? Like how do you categorize that? But, as we've done research and then also have worked with organizations ourselves, we've seen that like awareness, consideration, and decision are sort of the standard, like, default kind of buckets. But
Right.
is that always the case?
Great. So it's a couple of questions. I'll address them, one at a time. Firstly, in terms of understanding the buyer journey, it's a function of research. And I think it's primary and secondary research. And primary research, again, it's going to be customers. And you'll hear me say this a lot because I really believe, and I've seen in my career, that nothing informs success more than actually asking your customers. So primary research, in terms of, it can be structured surveys, it can be actual interviews. There's a lot of ways to get that information. Secondary research, there's a lot of data out there, whether it's research institutes, Pew Institute, Statista. There's also Google Analytics, Google Trends, going through the way people search, and the keywords as they become more specific will also help inform the buyer journey, help explain to you how people are moving down that path. So I think it's a combination of both. And that's kind of your desk research. Then you definitely have to speak to sales. And however much sales has their opinion about things, they're the front line. They're the people speaking. They're the guys who are actually hearing the objections. So sales, customer success, and the product team. And between the three of them, I think that gives you a good sense of, what is actually happening, on the front. Customer success is, what are people actually staying for and getting value from? And product in terms of, what's it meant to be offering in terms of its value. And I think that will help you understand the buyer journey better. In terms of the buckets, so I think the answer is yes, it's always those three in terms of a 50,000 foot view, right? Because always you want people to, become aware of what you're offering, consider diverse alternatives, and then decide and, activate or, buy the product. But in practice, I found that it's usually not those three, or it's a much more complex version of those three. One of the things, and where there's a big difference in B2B and B2C, is the 5 stages of awareness. So in B2C, you're generally trying to speak to people who are looking for something. Whereas a lot of B2B products, especially in SaaS, are often trying to educate a market about something that can solve the problem. So I've worked with setups where you'll have 6, 7 buckets, where the first buckets are all part of the awareness bucket, globally, but it's going through the stages of completely unaware, or then problem aware, solution aware, product aware, until now they actually understand, okay, I have this problem, there is something that can solve it. Oh, look, there are real products, and then they can move into consideration. So when you're building a nurturing funnel, when you're looking at a sales pipeline, and all the way through to from leads to MQLs to SQLs, you want to set up the buckets that make sense to move people through the decision points, to get them to the next stage of what your journey is. I believe ultimately it can always be summed up as, awareness, consideration, decision. But in practice, your automation or whatever system you're using is going to look a lot more complicated than that.
Awesome. That makes total sense. Now, I wanted to shift gears to some tools, because I know one of my favorite, and thank you so much for listing us in that article. One of my favorite pieces of content you shared, of course, I'm biased, was talking about these tools. So if you were to have to think about a set of categories of tools that are must-haves, especially in an environment where marketers are in reality having to do more with less budget and those sort of things, because of some macro trends. If you had to sort of categorize those must-haves for marketing as it relates to supporting with sales enablement, any sort of tools come to mind there?
Yeah. So unfortunately, yes, doing more with less is the kind of name of the game. If I have to pick the things that matter most, what I'd work on first, number one, presentations. Having slick sales presentations that are improving constantly with feedback, it's the most important asset that sales have. And being able to standardize that and put in the learnings, that is your foundation for scale. It's also ensuring brand consistency. It's getting the messaging where you want, and it's super important for marketing to be able to standardize that, also to learn from it. Now, though, you want that presentation to have, some customizability in it. People can pick and choose, put the slides they want. But basically, marketing, in my experience, in my opinion, I'm also subjective, but marketing should really be not necessarily controlling, but a key influence in those presentations. So that's the kind of must-have. Presentations make a difference, even if people aren't sure, or you're starting out, or they really know they want to buy already. But sales needs to be presented. In terms of more traditional, sales enablement material that's completely provided by marketing, the two things I would start with are data sheets. Now, depending how technical your industry is, it may not be a data sheet, more as like an informational brochure or kind of, summary of product, whereas some things, are highly, highly technical and really more data sheet. But, one pages, like a one pager that, what do we do? Why should you care? How's it going to make your life better? That's where you got to start. And battle cards, because most of sales is objection handling. So you want to be giving salespeople something they can call up quickly that says, this is our key value. This is how we're different to whoever you're talking about, and this is why you should choose us. So those are the two places I would go in terms of salespeople. And we take a step back, and we're getting a little bit more fancy. We've got a little bit more budget. We can do a little bit more than the bare minimum. Case studies. Case studies are killer. Like, it's very hard to get, especially enterprise clients or larger clients, across the line without case studies. And when you don't have someone who's willing to listen to you talk, the best thing you can give him is a case study to go and read and show other people. Now, if we could go one step further and we were able to do something, a little bit more, but we kind of really stretching the budget here, it's calculators. Calculators are amazing. It's an ROI calculator. It's an efficiency. It's whatever it is that you're selling, conversion rate changes, how it's going to shorten your deal cycle for RevOps, or whatever it is. Showing someone in numbers how the money they're going to spend is going to make them much more, make their life better, make them look better, that's often letting people make the sale to themselves, So yeah, I'd say presentations, make sure that marketing is part of that process. Put in place one pages, battle cards, case studies, and if you can, a calculator. That would be my must-haves.
Awesome. I was going to ask you what sales asset types you recommend for sales reps who are trying to build trust and authority. I know you've talked a lot about trust and authority building with a prospect during the early days, but I feel like some of the assets you just mentioned right now probably overlap. But is there anything that is more specific that you want to add to that last statement around, again, building authority and trust?
Great question. Not always possible, but where you can give them a template that they can use in their own work. It doesn't have to be exactly what your system does, but if you can give someone a template that they can use to make their job easier, or you can give them, like some sort of guide, that, like a checklist. Checklists are amazing. They show value. They show, thought leadership. They show, your industry. You understand their pains. So anything you can give them that can kind of be a reference, like some sort of piece of content that they can reference again and again, that makes their life easier, or helps them with, repetitive, gives them a framework to, execute against again and again. That's always the best received. And then often on-demand webinars. That's something else where you can, have people love watching in the background. So if you can have, and certain industries are much more about webinars than others, but if you can have some sort of library of on-demand webinars that are either talking about, new changes in the industry, best practices, regulation, compliance, things like this, that they can access when they want, and they feel that they're developing their own knowledge. It's all about adding value. Like, trust really is about value. if you add enough value, then you get the opportunity to prove yourself. And then it's about professionalism and delivering and, really giving a good experience. But trust starts with value.
Awesome. Marc, this was awesome. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your time and just insights here. There's so many things that you add that I wanted to dive into, but I want to respect your schedule. I know we got 2 minutes more. Um, I guess if folks wanted to learn more about the Product Marketing Weekly newsletter, what are the best URLs or channels to access that newsletter, and also what could they expect from accessing or reading or subscribing to the newsletter?
So LinkedIn, find me on LinkedIn. It's Marc Kenigsberg, and if you can anyway include a link, that would be great. And then subscribe to the newsletter there. Really, what it is it's me taking 20 years of experience and trying to distill it, bit by bit, and give people a foundation. And each issue I try and cover one aspect that is, this is what you need to know about approaching marketing frameworks. This is what you need to know about sales enablement. And I would say it's not deep dives. It's not deep dives into anything, but it's trying to bring everyone to a good understanding and have a discussion. So what you could expect is easy reads that will take one concept and give you some practical on how to actually implement it. And I always try and include some stories or some things from my own experience. So it's not just theoretical, but it's actually something that's been, battle tested and I've used in multiple cases. So, and also just reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm super happy. I love talking about these things. I love the challenges of new environments. And I've been very privileged to work for some of the most amazing companies and amazing leaders. And I really love the opportunity to be able to help other people and, give back wherever I can.
Awesome. That was awesome. Thank you so much.